Hey, welcome back to the course. We're on lesson 7, finance and sources of finance. In this lesson, you will understand why businesses need finance, sources of finance, internal and external sources of finance, long-term versus short-term sources of finance, and break-even analysis. Let's get it. So, first of all, need for finance. Why businesses need finance?
Well, I know why they need money. Because businesses need money to survive. I like money.
Duh! Yeah, we all know that. However, it's not that simple. It's a little bit deeper than that. So here's the key concepts. First of all, capital expenditure, revenue expenditure, cash flow, working capital, liquidity, and insolvency. Let's study these. So, capital expenditure, this is when a business buys something big that they usually expect to use for more than 1 year. This is stuff like machinery or buildings, whereas revenue expenditure, this is just spending money on day-to-day expenses for running the business. These are things like wages, rent, and utility bills. Cash flow, I think you guys know that. Working capital, the finance needed for the day-to-day running of a business, calculated as current assets minus current liabilities. So, this is one you really need to remember. The finance needed for the day-to-day running of a business. That's working capital. Liquidity. This is the ability of a business to pay its short-term debts and obligations. And whenever a business can't pay off its short-term debts and obligations, this is what's known as insolvency. It's a situation where a business cannot pay its debts when they are due.
Oh my God.
So let's move on. First, we have capital expenditure. These are assets that are used for more than 1 year. They're long-term. They involve larger sums of money. They're usually one-offs. They're non-recurring. You're not going to buy a new building every year. At least that wouldn't be very efficient, right? Some examples include buying or upgrading new machinery, purchasing land or facilities, and buying a patent. Revenue expenditure. This is about paying for short-term expenses. Involves smaller sums of money, and the money is usually spent on maintaining the business. So these are things like employee wages, rent, buying raw materials and stationery, marketing campaigns. These are things that are like day to day. Now, sources of finance. Here we have tung 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 sahur ta 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 sahur. Take a look. So, internal sources, these include retained profits. These are profits kept in the business after part of the profit has been distributed to owners or shareholders, so they might reinvest this into the business. It also includes sale of assets. So if you need some money, you could sell things like cars, equipment, or property. Now, an example of this would be Tung 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 Sahur owns a cafe selling expensive coffee drinks. He has done well and is looking to expand. He decides to open one additional coffee shop using the profits he has earned from his business, his retained profits. That's an internal source of finance. So he's using internal finance to expand his business. Now let's take a look at external sources of finance. And now look at Tung Tung Tung. He's blinged out, cuh. We have bank loans. These are loans from a bank, and usually these are pretty high amounts, but they have a lower interest rate. A mortgage. This is a loan for a house or facility. And hire purchase. In America, we call this financing, but in the British curriculum, it's usually known as hire purchase. It's when you take a loan to buy something expensive like new machinery. Also, there's share capital, money raised from selling shares in the business to investors. Every time that you buy a share of a company, you're essentially giving them your money in exchange for part ownership of that business. So, here's an example here. Tung 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 Sahur has opened his new cafe, but realizes he is running short on funds. He still needs to buy new and expensive coffee equipment. He decides to finance the new machines, so he only has to pay a small amount up front. Now, he's going to pay on that every month, so this is external because he's basically kind of taking a loan to pay for these machines. But in the short term, look at him, he's balling. He's got money flying around, he can make it rain, cuh. Now, here's an important distinction for your exams: long-term and short-term sources of finance. So here we have the long-term sources of finance here. The first one is retained profits. We already learned about that. Sale of assets, we learned about that as well. Owner's capital, of course. We also have share capital, remember, from buying shares. Then we have debentures. These are long-term loans issued by a company, usually with fixed interest. This is an important term to know, but it doesn't come up so often, but it can. It definitely can. And then, of course, we have bank loan, mortgage. We already talked about those. The last one is venture capital. This is investment from individuals or firms in return for ownership/equity. Anytime in finance you hear the term VC, that usually means a venture capital firm. So there are companies that just invest in other companies, usually startups or businesses that aren't super well established, and they do that in order to make a return. So yeah, that's venture capital. Okay, now on to short-term sources of finance. The first one is bank overdraft. This is where the bank allows a business to spend more than their balance up to a limit. So let's say that you want to buy something that's $1,000, but you only have $800 in your account. Well, the bank could allow you to overdraft. That means that they will pay that $1,000 and you'll have to pay them the difference, usually with interest. So that's short term because it doesn't really need much approval from anyone and you can just do it. We also have trade credit. This is where suppliers allow delayed payments for goods or services. So you could say, hey man, could I pay you in like 5 days instead of paying you today or tomorrow? It's basically you getting an extension. Then we have debt factoring. This is something that not many students understand, so I'm going to illustrate it for you right now.
All right, Diddy Bloods, it's time to learn about debt factoring. So let's say, here's you. You're a happy guy. You. Right? And then we have the customer here. Customer. And this guy, he's not that great. He doesn't want to pay his invoice. Not cool. So you've been waiting on your customer, let's say at first 1 month, then 2 months, then 3 months. He doesn't want to pay his invoice. He doesn't want to give you your money that you rightfully earned. So after, let's say, 4 or 5 months, you're like, look, man, I am not happy. Look, we can make him unhappy. I am not happy anymore. I need money from this invoice. Let's say this guy owes me $10K. There's an invoice for $10K, and he hasn't given it to me yet. Wah, wah, wah. So what you can do is you can go to a debt factoring company. And you can say, okay, look, this customer, he hasn't paid me in like 5 or 6 months. And I'm essentially going to sell you this invoice. I'm going to sell you this debt. So what'll happen is this invoice will be sold to this debt factoring company. Now, the invoice is worth $10K, but the debt factoring company is only going to give you like $7K. They're only going to give you about $7,000 because they're taking a risk. Because what if this customer, ends up not paying at all? So what they're going to do is they're going to go to him and say, hey, you need to pay your invoice. We've bought your debt. You need to pay for this. And the idea is, hopefully, this guy will finally say, okay, fine, look, I'll pay my invoice. Here's your $10K USD. And then the profit for the debt factoring company will be $3K. So you, as the business owner, you get the quick $7K. The debt factoring company gets the invoice, which is worth $10K. So their profit in this situation would be worth $3K. That's debt factoring. It allows you to get money in quickly, but there's a price. There's a price. You're not going to get the full value of the invoice, of course. But at least at the end, you won't be sad. You'll just be like, whatever, cuh.
Welcome back from the illustration. So now we have a short-term loan. That's pretty self-explanatory. And then working capital management. This is a term that you need to know. This is improving cash flow by managing receivables, inventories, and payables. This basically means that you're going to increase your short-term finance by having better management of your business processes. That means getting money and keeping your inventory and paying on time or being able to delay payments, etc. So here's a past paper question. It says, analyze 2 factors which may influence a business's choice of source of finance. So remember, this is worth 8 marks, which means that you need to have 2 balanced paragraphs. And the command word here is analyze. Analyze means develop logical reasoning and show consequences, and the examiner really wants to see a chain of reasoning. So first we have AO1 knowledge. This is worth a total of 2 points. It's 1 mark for each factor, and you have to give 2. So we have reason for needing finance, short-term or long-term, availability of finance, cost of the finance, reputation of the business, Any of these will do. If you mention these, you're already going to get 1 point per factor. So that's 2 points total just for knowing these basic key terms. Then we have AO2 application. So here, 1 mark for application/explanation of one factor which may influence a business choice of source of finance. So we have startup finance, expansion, product development. Why is it needed? And you can see here the other bullet points. But I want to go on to AO3 analysis because this is where literally 4 of your marks are going to come from. Half of the marks on this answer are from analysis. So take a look. Startup business with no established record or reputation may have to rely on owners' savings or crowdfunding as not attractive to other investors. So here you see there's a chain of reasoning. Well, if it's a startup business and they have no record, they have no reputation, then they're going to have to rely more on the owners because no one wants to invest in them. They have no confidence in them. Small established business wanting to grow may take on more partners/owners, but limit this to keep control with the original owner. So you see here, there's a chain of reasoning. Now, I want to look at this ideal answer. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I want to draw your attention to the signposting language. So here we see one factor that may influence blah, 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 blah. So then you give the explanation, and then we have in contrast, and this is here because remember what I said? If you have an 8 marker, you need 2 balanced paragraphs. So you need to explore kind of both sides. You can't just be one-sided. Take a look at the other paragraph here as well. Additionally, blah, 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 blah. So you're giving your other factor. And then look here. Conversely, so you're giving balance. Now, of course, you can pause this here and read this full answer. I just wanted to be sure that you knew how this is graded and what they're looking for and signposting language you can use to show balance. So now let's move on to break-even analysis. So why do businesses do break-even analysis? It's to determine the precise sales volume where total revenue equals total cost, ensuring they do not operate at a loss. This is a magic formula. Total revenue equals total cost. At that point, that is called your break-even point. Let's talk more about that. The break-even point, this is where total costs equal total revenue. There is no profit and no loss at this point. You're breaking even. You're not losing money. You're not making money. Now, the break-even output, this is the level of output you have to break even. That's pretty self-explanatory. Now, the one where a lot of students miss points is the margin of safety. This is the difference between the current or expected level of sales/output and the break-even output. So let's just take a look at a graph here. I'll show you what I mean. So take a look at this graph. This should look familiar because when we looked at cost, we had a similar graph. So look here, we have the fixed costs. This is the black line. We also have the variable costs. That's the blue line. We have the total costs, that's the red line, and then we have the total revenue, that's the green line. So take a look here. Knowing what we just learned about where total costs equals total revenue, where do you think the break-even point is? Give it a shot. You better have paused the video, cuh. Anyway, take a look. It's here. This is the break-even point. It's where the total costs line intersects with the total revenue line. One other illustration I want to show you is, take a look. After these lines intersect, we have this green area here. That's the profit area. Once you're above here, once your total revenue is more than your total costs, you are now in profit. But if your total revenue is less than your total cost, then you are in a state of loss. And if we look here at this data, this is the data that I plotted on the graph. If we take a look here, you'll see total costs, total revenue. Well, where are they the same? It's here. So the units of output needed are 1,250 units. And look at the graph. You can see that. Break-even point, 1,250 units. It's right here. You can see it on this graph as well. It's the same graph. It's the same data points. I just plotted it on my own so I could make the graph a bit clearer. But look here. At 1,250 units, we hit the break-even point, the BEP. Now, on to margin of safety. Take a look at this graph here. Let's say that our current output is here at 2,000 units. So, we have our total costs here and our total revenue here. The margin of safety is the current level of output minus the break-even output. So here at 2,000, if we take a look, 2,000 units, our margin of safety is 750. Why? Because 2,000 minus 1,250 gives us 750. Look here. It's our margin of safety. 2,000 minus 1,250, it gives us 750 right here on the table. But now look, margin of safety can be negative. What if you're outputting 1,000 units, but your break-even output is 1,250 units? Well, it can be a negative value. That means you're in loss. If your margin of safety is negative, it means you're in loss. If it's positive, that means you're in profit. So at 2,500 units output, for example, you have 1,250 units more than your break-even point. And it's important to know this because businesses need to know if they're barely making money or if they're not making money at all. You know, if you're producing 1,500 units, you have a margin of safety of 250. You're not that far from just breaking even. You might look at this actually and say, hey, that might be a bit worrying. If there's even one small factor that changes between this trading period and the next, then we could be breaking even or worse, be in a loss. So that's why it's important.
Aye, good job, cuh.
I actually prompted AI to make Joe Biden as a pimp, making it rain, throwing money everywhere, and this is what it produced. I thought it was kind of funny. Anyway, so you're almost at the end of the course. Hang in there. In the next lesson, we're going to learn key formulae and business metrics. See you there.